23 daggers tore through the flesh. They brought not freedom, but pure, absolute chaos. Caesar's blood stained the Senate floor. They smiled, believing they were the saviors. But the silence of Rome was the answer. The people saw no heroes, only cruel traitors. They thought the Republic would be reborn. Little did they know they had just signed their death. They did not flee at once. They shouted victory, but the echo that returned was pure fear and dread. Julius Caesar was dead, but his ghost would be far more lethal than the man alive. The liberators did not count on the will. The people loved the tyrant who gave them bread. At the funeral, Mark Antony used no swords. He used sharp words to incite real revolt. He showed the bloody toga to the people. The crowd, once confused, turned into a raw, wild beast. The assassins looked at the burning streets. The dream of freedom turned into a brutal nightmare. Rome burned in uncontrollable fury. Those illustrious men who hours before saw themselves as fathers of the country now ran like rats through the sewers to escape lynching. The mob wanted no philosophy. They wanted vengeance and hot blood right now. While the assassins fled to the east, believing themselves saved by distance, a new piece entered the board. An 18-year-old boy, pale and sickly, landed in Italy. No one feared him, but he carried the heavy name of Caesar. Octavian was no warrior. He was a cold and calculating genius. He sold everything he had to pay what Caesar promised the people in his will. With gold and his father's sacred name, he bought the loyalty of the most lethal legions of the ancient world. The stage was set for the massacre. Octavian joined Mark Antony and Lepidus. It was no friendship, it was a pact of hungry wolves. Together, they formed the second triumvirate and divided the Roman world as if it were meat in a dirty butcher shop. The first order was not war, it was a purge. A list of names was nailed to the Forum of Rome. Anyone could kill the proscribed. The reward was the money and lands of the dead man. The great orator Cicero had his hands cut off. They nailed them to the rostrum where he spoke there. Terror took over every alley in Rome. No one was safe from their thirst for vengeance. With the capital clean and coffers full of blood, the war machine turned to the east. Brutus and Cassius waited with armies. The final battle for the soul of Rome was about to begin now. The plains of Philippi in Greece trembled. On one side, the avengers with the fury of the past. On the other, the last defenders of a republic that was already dead. It was the greatest meeting of military power in history. 200,000 men ready to slaughter each other for opposing ideals. Cassius, the brain of the conspiracy, was an experienced and cautious general. He wanted to win by starvation, blocking enemy supplies. But Brutus, tormented by visions and night ghosts, yielded to the pressure of his officers and ordered the attack that would seal everyone's fate. The chaos of battle brought a cruel irony. While Brutus defeated Octavian's troops, Cassius was crushed by Mark Antony. In the confusion of dust and blood, Cassius looked at the horizon and mistook his friend's victory for total defeat, believing everything was lost. In a tragic act of despair, Cassius handed the same dagger he used to pierce Caesar to his servant. He asked for death. The man who engineered the fall of a god died from an error of vision, killing himself with the blade of betrayal before knowing his army still resisted. When Brutus found his friend's body, his soul broke. He called Cassius the last of the Romans. But there was no time for mourning. For 3 weeks, he tried to keep his army united, but the smell of death and the shadow of imminent defeat destroyed his soldiers' morale. The second battle was a massacre without pity. Brutus's legions no longer fought for freedom. They fought only to survive, and they failed. The lines broke, and the men who swore to protect democracy were hunted like wild animals through the bloody Greek fields. Brutus fled to the hills, surrounded and alone. He realized the futility of his virtue. He looked at the stars and lamented that honor was just an empty word. To avoid being paraded as a trophy in Rome, he threw himself upon his own sword, ending the Republican dream. With the leaders dead, the world thought the war was over. But for Octavian, revenge was a dish eaten cold, down to the last bite. He had a list. 60 senators had raised daggers on that fateful day, and he swore that none of them would die of old age. The manhunt that followed was unprecedented. No matter where they hid, the assassins were found. Decimus Brutus, betrayed by a Gallic chief, had his head sent to Rome. Others fled to the sea, but storms and traitors were everywhere. One by one, the men who sat at the table with Caesar and betrayed him met violent ends, some in battle, others in dark alleys, many by their own hands. Octavian's justice was relentless, sweeping the Mediterranean to ensure the blood debt was paid. Octavian's list grew shorter each year. Revenge was not a passion, it was a cold bureaucracy. Cassius Parmensis was the last to fall. He hid for years, but the shadow of Rome found him there. 14 years after the stabbings, justice was done. All the assassins were already dead. But by eliminating Caesar's enemies, something new was born. The path was clear for the king. This saga of blood shaped the world we know today. If you are impressed by the brutality of Roman justice, hit the like button right now. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of history. Comment below. Was Octavian a hero or a monster? With vengeance complete, only two giants remained at the top of the world, Octavian and Mark Antony. The world was too small for two such voracious ambitions. The alliance forged in blood dissolved, turning the former Avengers into mortal enemies in a new civil war. Octavian used propaganda as a weapon. He painted Antony not as a Roman, but as the puppet of Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt. Rome, exhausted by wars, united under Octavian's banner, seeing in him the only hope for stability against the foreign threat coming from the Nile. The final showdown at Actium decided the fate of humanity. Octavian's victory was total and absolute. Antony and Cleopatra chose suicide over the humiliation of chains. Now, the young man who had been underestimated by everyone stood alone at the summit of power with no one to challenge him. And here lies the greatest irony of the entire story. The senators killed Caesar because they feared he would become king. They plunged the world into decades of war to save the Republic. But with their actions, they destroyed the only institutions that could prevent tyranny. By eliminating all political rivals in their wars, the liberators cleared the path for Octavian. He did not make his father's mistakes. He did not call himself king, but accumulated more power than any monarch. He became Augustus, the first emperor of a new eternal era. The Senate, now filled with loyal men tired of war, voluntarily handed him control. Liberty died not with a scream, but with applause of relief. The 23 stabbings intended to kill the dictatorship served only as the bloody birth of the empire. Rome's revenge was complete, but not in the way expected. The city avenged itself on its own corruption by transforming into something new. The Republic, old and sick, needed to die so that Rome could survive as the undisputed mistress of the entire known world. None of the conspirators lived to see the world they created. Their intentions might have been noble or envious, but the result was the opposite of what was planned. They wanted the past, but their daggers forced the abrupt and violent arrival of the future under the heel of a single man. Augustus ruled for 40 years in an iron peace. He transformed a city of brick into a city of marble. Caesar's name became a title, Kaiser, Tsar, echoing through eternity. All of this born from that fateful day in March and Brutus's fatal mistake. History teaches us that a power vacuum will always be filled. Those who use violence to change the world often end up being the tools of the very tyranny they swore to fight. Rome survived, but the senators' freedom was buried with their bodies. Thus ends the tragedy of the Ides of March. Blood begot blood, and the end begot the beginning. Of all those involved, only one won, young Octavian, who became a god on earth. The ruins of Rome still whisper this story, an eternal warning about betrayal and raw power. They killed the man, but eternalized the myth. Julius Caesar won even after death, indeed. Rome never forgets, Rome never forgives. Revenge was the legacy left for all history. The Republic was already moribund, long before the stabbings. The old system could no longer support the weight of a world empire. The daggers merely hastened the inevitable, exchanging the corrupt anarchy of the many for the cold and absolute order of one man in power. The word freedom, shouted by Brutus, echoed hollow. For the common people, freedom was not voting in the Senate, it was having food and peace. Caesar offered that. The senators offered only the maintenance of their own privileges and their ancient riches, with nothing in return. Caesar's name transcended the man and death. It became synonymous with supreme power. Centuries later, Russian kings and German emperors would still use variations of that name to legitimize their thrones. Julius's final victory was conquering eternity through his name. Augustus brought the Pax Romana, a golden age bought with the blood of idealists. The world accepted the trade without question. Security was worth far more than the political freedom of an elite that had already lost connection with the reality of the people it governed. Imagine the sleepless nights of the fugitive conspirators. They realized too late that they were not fighting a tyrant, but the very march of history. Every shadow hid a dagger. Every stranger's face could be the executioner sent by Rome to collect the debt. The marble floor washed with blood would never be the same again. That act of extreme violence taught Octavian that mercy was a fatal error. He built his reign on fear and respect, ensuring that no one would ever dare raise a hand against him. Mark Antony's loyalty to Caesar was his virtue and his ruin. He loved the man, but underestimated the heir. This familial and political tragedy redefined the borders of the world, proving that in Rome, cunning is worth far more than brute force or pure courage. There would never be a true Roman Republic again. The institutions remained as theater, but real power moved to the palace. The liberators killed Caesar's body, but gave his soul the perfect vehicle to rule the world forever through Augustus. Political violence generates unpredictable consequences. They removed the central piece of the board without having a plan for the next game. The result was the total collapse of everything they knew, swept away by the storm they themselves conjured in the Senate that day. We end here the chronicle of antiquity's greatest revenge. From the blood of the Senate to the fields of Greece, justice was served cold. A brutal lesson that, in the struggle for supreme power, there is no room for half measures, only absolute winners or dead men. The past is a cruel mirror. Those who ignore history repeat the same fatal mistakes always. Unbridled ambition charges a high price. For them, the price was life and their own honor. Rome was not built in a day, but the Republic was destroyed in just one gray afternoon. The daggers gleamed, blood ran, and the fate of the world changed in a terrible instant. The question hangs in the air. Was it worth it? History answers with the cold silence of tombs. The narrative of the Ides of March is more than a tale of death. It is a study of human nature. It shows how envy can disguise itself as virtue and how justice can be as terrible as the crime. Rome teaches us that every empire is born from a bloody betrayal. Looking back, we see the fragility of human intentions against the force of destiny. Brutus wanted to be remembered as the new founder of freedom, but he is remembered only as the supreme traitor, condemned by history to carry the eternal guilt of the vile murder. The figure of Octavian Augustus stands as a monument to strategic patience. He did not scream, he did not run, he just acted. He understood that to avenge his father, he needed to be more than a son. He needed to be the architect of an unshakable new world reality. And the people, the Roman plebs, forgotten by the senators, were the ones who decided the winner. They chose the stability of the empire over the chaos of the oligarchic republic. It was the silent cry of the masses that gave Octavian the crown Caesar could never fully wear in life. The stones of the Roman Forum are still there, worn by time. If they could speak, they would tell not of heroes, but of flawed men consumed by the fear of losing power. The glory of Rome is eternal, but it was mortared with the most famous betrayal of all ages. The final irony is that in trying to prevent the monarchy, the assassins created the model of absolute monarchy that would dominate Europe for 1,500 years. The shot backfired so spectacularly that it changed humanity's governance forever and totally. Julius Caesar, the man, died. But Caesar, the idea, became immortal. He had the last laugh, not with a roar of laughter, but through the continuity of his legacy. His assassins are bloody footnotes in the great biography of the man they tried to erase from the world. Rome's revenge was not just killing the guilty, it was erasing the reason they fought for. The Republic was swept away, forgotten, replaced. That was the true punishment, knowing at the moment of death that all the effort and sacrifice had been totally in vain. Thus closes the cycle of gold and blood, a story that began with 23 stabbings and ended with a golden empire. The lesson remains alive. Beware of what you wish to destroy, for from the ashes of destruction may rise something much more powerful and very terrible. May this story serve as a warning to those who seek power. Betrayal may open doors, but only loyalty builds legacies. Rome watches, Rome judges, and in the end, history is written only by those who survive to hold the pen. The rest is just silence.